The roar of the river drowned out everything, even her own screaming, as Genevieve Monroe's fingers dug desperately into the bark of the massive cottonwood log that was her only lifeline in the churning brown water. The spring runoff had turned the usually placid Medicine Bow River into a monster, and she was caught in its jaws, being swept downstream faster than a galloping horse. Her sodden skirts wrapped around her legs like iron chains, dragging her down every time the log rolled, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was going to die on this bright May morning in 1882, just 3 days after arriving in Wyoming territory. She had been a fool to try crossing the swollen creek on foot. The wagon master had warned her that morning when their train stopped near Wheatland, told her the water was too high, too fast, too dangerous, but Genevieve had seen the wildflowers blooming on the far bank, had wanted to gather some to press in her journal, had thought herself capable of managing a simple stream crossing. The creek had looked so innocent from the bank, perhaps 20 feet wide, the water sparkling in the sunshine. She had not anticipated the hidden drop-off where the bottom fell away beneath her feet, had not expected the current to seize her like a living thing and tear her from the safety of the shore before she could even draw breath to scream. Now she was miles downstream, her bonnet long gone, her dark hair plastered to her face and neck, her arms burning with the effort of maintaining her grip on the log. The banks rushed past in a blur of green and brown. She caught glimpses of cottonwood trees, rocky outcroppings, muddy slopes too steep to climb even if she could somehow reach them. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably despite the warmth of the day. The water was snow melt from the mountain, so cold it felt like knives cutting into her flesh. She tried to kick toward shore, but the weight of her clothing made movement nearly impossible. Her boots felt like anchors. The log spun sickeningly, and she went under for a moment, swallowing water, choking, her lungs burning. When she surfaced, gasping and coughing, black spots danced before her eyes. She was not going to last much longer. Her strength was fading fast. Then she heard it, a sound that cut through the thunder of the water, a man's voice, strong and commanding, shouting something she could not quite make out. She managed to turn her head, blinking water from her eyes, and saw him on the bank, perhaps 50 yards downstream, a cowboy on a big bay horse waving his hat, his mouth moving. He was trying to tell her something, but the river swallowed his words. She watched in amazement as he did not hesitate for even a heartbeat. He jammed his hat back on his head, leaned forward in the saddle, and sent his horse plunging directly into that raging torrent. The bay disappeared up to its chest in the brown water, but the cowboy kept it moving, angling downstream, clearly planning to intercept her. It was the most courageous and possibly the most foolish thing Genevieve had ever witnessed. The horse was powerful, its legs pumping steadily beneath the surface, but the current was stronger. The river pushed them downstream, even as they struggled toward the center channel where Genevieve clung to her log. She could see the cowboy's face now, set with determination, his eyes locked on her. He was young, perhaps 25, with dark hair curling from beneath his hat and several days' worth of beard shadowing his jaw. His rope was already in his hand, and as the distance between them closed, he began to swing it overhead. "Grab the rope!" he shouted, and this time she heard him clearly. "Let go of the log and grab the rope." Terror seized her. Let go of the log? The log was all that stood between her and drowning, but even as that thought formed, she understood that the log was also killing her, dragging her downstream toward whatever rapids or falls might await. She had to trust this stranger. She had no other choice. The rope sailed through the air, arcing over the water. It fell short by 3 feet, and the current immediately swept it away. The cowboy hauled it back quickly, coiling it with practiced efficiency even as he fought to keep his seat on the struggling horse. The bay was swimming now, its hooves finding no purchase on the riverbed, and Genevieve realized they were all being swept along together, the cowboy and his mount in as much danger as she was. He threw again. This time the loop landed across the log, close enough that she could grab it if she dared release her death grip on the bark. She looked up at him, and their eyes met across the 10 feet of churning water that separated them. His eyes were blue, startlingly blue, even from this distance, and they held hers with an intensity that gave her courage. "I got you!" he shouted. "I promise! I got you!" Genevieve made her decision. She released the log with one hand and lunged for the rope, catching it on the first try. She quickly wrapped it twice around her wrist, then let go of the log entirely and grabbed the rope with both hands. The current immediately tried to rip her away, but the rope held. The cowboy had already secured his end to the saddle horn, and now he urged his horse towards the bank, toward the eastern shore where the water looked slightly calmer. The next few minutes were a nightmare of water and pain. The rope burned her hands despite her grip. She went under twice, came up choking, went under again. Her waterlogged skirts tried to pull her to the bottom, but the cowboy kept his horse moving steadily toward shore, and gradually, incrementally, they made progress. The bay found footing on the rocky bottom and lunged forward, pulling Genevieve behind it like a fish on a line. Then she felt the bank beneath her knees. Solid ground. She collapsed forward onto the muddy slope, retching river water shaking so hard she thought her bones might rattle apart. Strong hands gripped her shoulders, turned her onto her side so she could breathe, held her steady while she coughed and gasped. "Easy now," the cowboy said, his voice gentler than she expected. "Easy. You're safe now. Just breathe." Genevieve finally managed to draw a full breath that did not end in coughing. She lay on her side in the mud, aware that she must look like a drowned rat, aware that without this man she would be dead, aware that her entire body hurt in ways she had not known were possible. Slowly, she pushed herself up to sitting, wiping mud and water from her face with trembling hands. The cowboy crouched beside her, studying her with concern. Up close, he was even younger than she had first thought, probably no more than 24 or 25, with sun-darkened skin and those remarkable blue eyes. He was soaked to the skin, his shirt plastered to a lean, muscular frame, his dark hair dripping water down his face. His horse stood a few feet away, sides heaving, head down, as exhausted as its rider. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "Anything broken?" Genevieve shook her head, not trusting her voice yet. Now that the immediate danger had passed, reaction was setting in. She started to cry, great gulping sobs that she could not control, and she buried her face in her hands, ashamed of her weakness, but unable to stop. The cowboy did not seem bothered by her tears. He simply sat down beside her in the mud and waited, occasionally patting her shoulder awkwardly, but offering the comfort of his presence. After a few minutes, Genevieve managed to compose herself. She scrubbed at her face with her wet sleeve and turned to look at him. "Thank you," she said, her voice hoarse from river water and crying. "You saved my life. You and your horse. I do not even know your name." "Kade Thompson," he said, extending his hand. "I have a small ranch about 2 miles east of here. I saw you go past while I was checking fence line. Saw you hanging onto that log and figured you would not last much longer without help." "Genevieve Monroe," she said, taking his hand. His grip was warm and strong despite the cold water they had both endured. "I am traveling with a wagon train. We were camped near Wheatland. I tried to cross a creek this morning to pick flowers and the current took me. That was hours ago, I think. I have no idea how far I have come." "You were about 8 miles downstream from Wheatland," Kade said. "Lucky for you, the river widens out here and slows down some. Another mile downstream there are rapids that would have killed you for certain." He studied her for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "Can you ride? My horse is tired, but he can carry double for a couple of miles. I need to get you somewhere warm and dry before you take a chill." Genevieve nodded, though in truth she was not sure she could even stand, much less ride. But Kade was already on his feet, moving to his horse, checking the animal over with quick, efficient movements. The bay lifted its head and nuzzled his shoulder, and Kade stroked its neck affectionately. "Good boy, Duke," he murmured. "Best horse in Wyoming you are. Saved a lady today. Yes, you did. He came back to Genevieve and helped her to her feet. Her legs nearly buckled, but he caught her easily, his arms strong around her waist. The world tilted alarmingly, and she leaned against him, breathing hard, fighting the dizziness. She could feel the solid warmth of his body through their wet clothes, could smell horse and river water and something else, something masculine and clean that was just him. Steady, he said quietly. Take your time. After a moment, the world stopped spinning. Kade walked her slowly to his horse, and she noticed for the first time that he was limping slightly, favoring his left leg. Had he been injured during the rescue? She started to ask, but he was already helping her mount, his hands on her waist, lifting her easily into the saddle. She settled herself as best she could in her sodden skirts, trying not to think about how improper this all was, a strange man touching her, helping her onto his horse. Propriety seemed absurd after nearly drowning. Kade swung up behind her, settling into the saddle with easy grace despite his limp. He reached around her to gather the reins, and suddenly Genevieve was very aware of how close they were. His chest pressed against her back, his arms encircling her. She sat rigid, unsure where to put her hands, unsure of everything. "You can relax," Kade said, and she could hear amusement in his voice. "I do not bite. And you might want to hold on to the saddle horn. Duke is tired, but he still has some spirit." Genevieve gripped the horn gratefully, and Kade clucked to the horse. Duke moved forward at a steady walk, heading away from the river and into the grassland beyond. The sun was warm on Genevieve's face, and she found herself shivering less violently, though whether from the warmth or from Kade's body heat at her back, she could not say. They rode in silence for a while. The land here was beautiful in a spare, wild way that Genevieve was still learning to appreciate. Rolling grassland stretched in every direction, dotted with sage and occasional stands of cottonwoods. To the west, the mountains rose blue and massive against the sky, their peaks still white with snow. Hawks circled overhead, riding the thermals, and in the distance she could see a small herd of pronghorn antelope grazing peacefully. "Is it always this dangerous?" she asked finally. "The water, I mean?" "In spring, yes," Kade said. "Snow melt from the mountains. By midsummer, the rivers will be low and calm, but right now they are deadly. You are not the first person to underestimate them, and you will not be the last." He paused. "You said you are with a wagon train, heading to Oregon?" "California," Genevieve said. "San Francisco. My aunt and uncle have a dry goods business there. They invited me to come help them run it. I am from Philadelphia originally. This is my first time west of the Mississippi." "Long way from home," Kade observed. "Yes," Genevieve agreed. She did not add that Philadelphia had held nothing for her anymore. Not after her parents had died of typhoid the previous winter. Not after the man she had thought she would marry had decided to wed her wealthier cousin instead. The invitation from her California relatives had seemed like a blessing, a chance to start fresh somewhere new. She had not expected the journey to be quite so eventful. Kade's ranch came into view sooner than she expected. A neat cluster of buildings nestled in a fold of land near a tree-lined creek. There was a small cabin with a stone chimney, a larger barn, several corrals, and what looked like a bunkhouse. Genevieve could see cattle grazing in the distance, 50 head or more, fat and healthy looking. For a young man working alone, Kade had built himself a respectable operation. He rode Duke directly to the cabin and dismounted, then helped Genevieve down. Her legs were steadier now, though she still felt weak and shaky. Kade opened the cabin door and ushered her inside into a single large room that served as kitchen, dining area, and sleeping quarters all in one. It was surprisingly neat for a bachelor's dwelling. The plank floor swept clean, dishes washed and stacked on a shelf, the bed in the corner made up with military precision. "Sit by the stove," Kade said, moving to poke up the fire. "I will get you some dry clothes. They will be too big, but better than sitting in wet ones." He disappeared behind a curtain that apparently hid a storage area and emerged a moment later with a flannel shirt and a pair of woolen trousers. He handed them to Genevieve, then grabbed a towel from a hook near the wash basin. "I will go tend to Duke, and give you privacy to change," he said. "There is coffee in the pot if you want it. Help yourself to anything you need." Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, and Genevieve was alone. She stood for a moment, dripping on his clean floor, hardly able to believe everything that had happened. This morning she had been safe in camp, planning to pick flowers. Now she was miles from the wagon train, alone in a strange man's cabin, about to change into his clothing. If her mother could see her now, she would faint dead away. But her mother was gone, and Genevieve was alone in a harsh land where rivers could kill you, and propriety seemed like a luxury no one could afford. She peeled off her sodden dress, her petticoats, her stockings, everything wet and muddy and ruined. She used the towel to dry herself as best she could, wringing the water from her long hair, then pulled on Kade's shirt and trousers. He had been right. They were far too large, the shirt hanging nearly to her knees, the trousers requiring her to roll up the legs several times and cinch the waist tight with the length of rope she found on a shelf. She must look ridiculous, but at least she was dry and warm. She hung her wet things over chairs near the stove to dry, poured herself a cup of the strong black coffee, and sat down to wait for Kade to return. When he came back 20 minutes later, she was feeling almost human again. The coffee had helped, and the warmth from the stove had stopped her shivering entirely. Kade had changed into dry clothes himself, and his dark hair was damp and freshly combed. He looked younger without the water dripping down his face, and Genevieve felt an unexpected flutter in her chest when he smiled at her. "Better?" he asked. "Much better," she said. "Thank you for everything. I owe you my life." Kade shrugged, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. "That is not true," Genevieve said quietly. "Most people would have been too afraid. You rode into that river without hesitation, risking your own life and your horse's life for a complete stranger. That is not something anyone would do. That is something a hero does." He looked even more uncomfortable now, a faint flush creeping up his neck. "I am no hero, just a man who was in the right place at the right time." He moved to the stove and poured himself coffee, then leaned against the table, studying her. "We should get you back to your wagon train. They will be worried about you." "They may not even know I'm missing yet," Genevieve said. "We were not planning to move camp until tomorrow morning. I told my traveling companions I was going for a walk. They will think I am just gone for a long time." She paused, considering. "How far is it back to Wheatland?" 8 miles to town, probably 10 to where the wagon trains usually camp," Kade said. "Too far to walk, and Duke needs rest before he carries double again. I can hitch up my wagon and drive you back tomorrow morning. Tonight you can sleep in here, and I will take the bunkhouse." It was a sensible plan, but Genevieve felt a flutter of nervousness at the thought of spending the night here, alone with a man she had known for less than 2 hours. Then again, what choice did she have? She could hardly walk 10 miles in her condition, and his horse was exhausted from the rescue. Tomorrow would have to do. "That is very kind of you," she said. "I do not want to put you out of your own bed, though." "You are not putting me out of anything," Kade said firmly. "The bunkhouse is plenty comfortable. I sleep there half the time anyway when I'm working late with the stock." He set down his coffee cup and moved toward the door. "I will bring in some fresh water and then see about supper. I imagine you are hungry." Genevieve realized she was starving. She had not eaten since breakfast, and that felt like a lifetime ago. "I can help cook," she offered. "You just nearly drowned," Kade said, his tone brooking no argument. "You rest. I can manage supper just fine." He disappeared outside, and Genevieve found herself smiling despite everything. Kade Thompson was unlike any man she had ever met. The men in Philadelphia had been concerned with business and social standing, with making the right connections and impressing the right people. Kade seemed concerned only with practical matters, tending his horse, making sure she was warm and dry, planning how to get her safely back to her wagon train. There was something refreshing about his straightforward competence, something that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since her parents died. Over the next hour, Kade proved that he was indeed capable of managing supper. He fried up salt pork and potatoes, made gravy that was surprisingly good, and even produced a loaf of bread that he admitted he had bought from a widow woman in Wheatland. They ate at the small table, and Genevieve found herself watching him, curious about this solitary cowboy who lived alone on the frontier. "Have you been ranching long?" she asked. 3 years, Kade said. "I worked on other people's ranches from the time I was 14, saved every penny I could, and finally bought this place when I turned 21. It is not much yet, but it is mine." "You should be proud," Genevieve said. "It looks like you have done very well for yourself." Kade smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look even younger. "I have been lucky. Good land, good water, and the cattle have done well. I am hoping to double my herd by next year." He paused. "What about you? You said you're going to San Francisco to work in your aunt and uncle's store?" Genevieve nodded. "They have no children of their own, and they are getting older. They need help with the business. I have some experience with bookkeeping and such from helping my father with his law practice." "You do not sound very excited about it," Kade observed. Genevieve was surprised by his perceptiveness. "It is a good opportunity," she said carefully. "Better than what I had in Philadelphia after my parents passed. I am grateful to have family who cares enough to offer me a place." "But?" Kade prompted. "But nothing," Genevieve said. "It is what I'm going to do." They finished supper in a comfortable silence, and afterward Kade insisted on cleaning up while Genevieve sat by the fire. She found herself growing drowsy, the warmth and the exhaustion from her ordeal catching up with her all at once. When Kade finally declared that he was heading to the bunkhouse for the night, she could barely keep her eyes open. "Door latches from the inside," he told her. "Duke is in the barn, and I will be in the bunkhouse if you need anything. You are perfectly safe." "Thank you," Genevieve said, "for everything." Kade nodded, grabbed a blanket from a chest, and headed out into the night. Genevieve latched the door behind him, then looked at the bed in the corner. It looked incredibly inviting. She extinguished all but one lamp, banked the fire in the stove, and crawled beneath the quilts. The bed smelled like Kade, like clean cotton and soap and that indefinable masculine scent that was his alone. It should have felt strange, sleeping in a man's bed, but instead it felt safe. She was asleep within minutes. When Genevieve woke the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the cabin's single window. She lay still for a moment, disoriented. Then memory came flooding back. The river, the log, Kade riding into the water to save her. She sat up slowly, taking stock of her body. She was sore in muscles she had not known she possessed, and her hands were raw from gripping the rope. But otherwise she seemed remarkably unscathed. Her dress and undergarments were still draped over the chair, stiff and only partially dry. She grimaced. She could not wear Kade's oversized clothes back to the wagon train, but she also could not wear a damp dress. She was still trying to decide what to do when she heard a knock at the door. "Miss Monroe?" Kade's voice came through the wood. "I have breakfast when you're ready." Genevieve quickly smoothed her borrowed clothing and unlatched the door. Kade stood on the porch holding a tray with 2 plates of eggs and bacon, more bread, and a pot of coffee. He looked well-rested and freshly shaved, and Genevieve was suddenly very aware that her hair was hanging loose down her back, uncombed and wild from sleep. "Good morning," she said, stepping back to let him in. "You did not have to bring me breakfast." "I figured you would be sore this morning," Kade said, setting the tray on the table. "Thought you might appreciate not having to walk over to the bunkhouse." His eyes flicked to her still damp dress. "Your things are not dry yet. I can loan you a shirt to wear under your dress at least. It will be more comfortable than wearing it directly against your skin when it is still damp." It was such a practical, thoughtful suggestion that Genevieve felt a rush of warmth toward him. "That would be wonderful, thank you." They ate breakfast together, talking about small things, safe things. Kade told her about his plans for the ranch, about the harsh winter they had survived, about the neighbors who lived 10 miles to the north and helped each other during branding and roundup. Genevieve told him about Philadelphia, about her work helping her father, about the long journey west. She did not mention the broken engagement or her uncertain feelings about California, and Kade did not pry. After breakfast, Genevieve changed back into her own clothing, wearing one of Kade's undershirts beneath her dress as he had suggested. It helped, making the damp fabric tolerable. She braided her hair as best she could without a mirror and pronounced herself ready to travel. Kade had already hitched his 2 draft horses to the wagon, a sturdy vehicle with high wheels designed for rough terrain. He helped Genevieve onto the seat, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. The morning was beautiful, the sky a flawless blue, the air crisp and clear. As they rolled away from the ranch, Genevieve found herself looking back, memorizing the little cabin, the barn, the green meadow where cattle grazed peacefully. "It is a beautiful place," she said. "It is home," Kade replied simply. The journey back to Wheatland took most of the morning. The trail was rough, winding through grassland and over low hills, fording 2 creeks that made Genevieve's heart race despite their shallowness. Kade kept up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out landmarks, telling her the names of the wildflowers that bloomed in purple and yellow clusters along the trail. Genevieve found herself relaxing, enjoying his company more than she had enjoyed anyone's company in a long time. When they finally reached the outskirts of Wheatland, Kade turned to her. "Where is your wagon train camped?" "North of town near the river," Genevieve said. "At least, that is where we were yesterday." But when they reached the campsite 20 minutes later, Genevieve's heart sank. The area was empty. Not a single wagon remained. Even the fire pits had been filled in, the trash buried, all signs of occupation erased. Her wagon train had moved on without her. Kade pulled the horses to a halt and sat staring at the empty campsite. "They left," he said unnecessarily. Genevieve felt panic rising in her throat. "They left. They left without me. Oh God, what am I going to do?" She pressed her hands to her face, trying to think, trying not to cry. All her belongings had been in the wagon she had been traveling in, the wagon that belonged to the Porter family who had agreed to let her travel with them in exchange for help with their children. Her trunk with her clothes, her money, her mother's jewelry, everything she owned in the world, gone. "Easy," Kade said, his voice calm. "Do not panic. We will figure this out." He thought for a moment. "Is there someone in the wagon train who might have taken your belongings for safekeeping?" "Mrs. Porter, maybe," Genevieve said, clutching at the hope. She knew I had gone for a walk. She might have assumed I would catch up. But even as she said it, she knew how unlikely it sounded. The wagon train had waited an extra day already. They would have searched for her, asked around town. When no one had seen her, they would have assumed the worst, that she had met with an accident, or been taken by Indians, or simply disappeared into the vastness of the frontier. They would have mourned her loss and moved on, because that was what wagon trains did. They could not afford to wait indefinitely for someone who might never return. Kade was clearly thinking the same thing. "When did your train leave St. Louis?" he asked. 6 weeks ago, Genevieve said. "We have been making good time. We were supposed to reach Fort Bridger in another 3 weeks, then on to California. The captain said we needed to be over the mountains before the snow came." "Then they cannot afford to wait," Kade said gently. "They have a schedule to keep. But that does not mean your belongings are lost. If Mrs. Porter is a decent woman, she will have kept your things safe. When the train reaches California, she will try to get word to your relatives that you were lost along the way. And in the meantime, I am stuck here with nothing but the clothes on my back," Genevieve said. The panic was turning to despair. "I have no money, no way to continue to California, no way to even send word to my aunt and uncle that I am alive." Kade was quiet for a long moment, his hands resting on the reins, his eyes on the distant mountains. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, as though he was thinking through each word. "You could stay in Wheatland for a while. Find work, save up money for passage on another wagon train next spring. There are families in town who might need help, or the hotel might need a cook or a maid." It was a sensible suggestion, but the thought of spending the winter in this small frontier town alone among strangers filled Genevieve with dread. She had no skills that would be particularly valuable here. She could read and write and do bookkeeping, but What use were such skills in a place where most people were worried about survival, about planting crops and raising cattle and staying warm through the brutal Wyoming winter? As if reading her thoughts, Kade spoke again. Or, he paused. Or you could stay at the ranch for a while. As a housekeeper, I mean. I could pay you a fair wage, room and board, plus maybe $10 a month. It is not much, but it would give you a place to stay while you figure out what to do next. Genevieve turned to stare at him. You are offering me a job? You barely know me? I know you are brave, Kade said. You survived that river. And I know you are honest, or you would have lied about where you came from and what you were doing. And I know I could use help around the place. I'm not much of a cook, as you probably noticed, and the cabin could use a woman's touch. He met her eyes. I am not offering charity, Miss Monroe. I am offering honest work for honest pay. You would have your own room. I would sleep in the bunkhouse, everything proper and respectable. Genevieve did not know what to say. It was an extraordinary offer from a man she had met less than 24 hours ago. It was also possibly her only real option. She could go into Wheatland and try to find work, but Kade was right that opportunities would be limited. And at least she knew Kade, knew that he was decent and honorable and had already proven he would risk his life to help her. That was more than she could say for most of the strangers in town. Why? She asked. Why would you do this for me? Kade shrugged, looking uncomfortable again. I told you. I need help around the place. And it seems like you need a place to stay. It makes sense. But Genevieve thought there was more to it than that. She thought maybe Kade was lonely out here by himself, that maybe he saw in her a kindred spirit, someone else who was alone in the world and looking for a place to belong. Or maybe she was just projecting her own feelings onto him. Either way, his offer was a lifeline, and she would be a fool not to take it. All right, she said. Yes, thank you. I accept your offer, Mr. Thompson. Kade, he corrected. If we are going to be living on the same ranch, you should call me Kade. Kade, Genevieve agreed, and you should call me Genevieve. He smiled at her, that transformative smile that made her heart do strange things in her chest. Genevieve it is. Now let us head into town and get you some supplies. If you are going to be working as a housekeeper, you will need some proper clothes, not my old shirt and trousers. They drove into Wheatland, a collection of perhaps 30 buildings clustered along the main road. There was a general store, a hotel, a blacksmith, a livery stable, and a saloon, along with various other businesses. Kade stopped the wagon outside the general store and helped Genevieve down. Inside, the store was dim and smelled of leather and tobacco and coffee. A middle-aged woman stood behind the counter, and her eyes widened when she saw Genevieve in her odd combination of clothes. Kade Thompson, the woman said. What have you gotten yourself into now? Morning, Mrs. Fletcher, Kade said easily. This is Miss Genevieve Monroe. She had an accident with the river yesterday, lost all her belongings. She is going to be working as my housekeeper, and she needs some clothes and supplies. Mrs. Fletcher's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. Your housekeeper? Well? She looked Genevieve up and down, her expression skeptical. A Philadelphia lady working as a housekeeper on a bachelor's ranch? That will certainly give the town something to talk about. Let them talk, Kade said, his voice harder than Genevieve had heard it before. Miss Monroe is a respectable woman who needs help, and I am offering honest employment. If anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me. Mrs. Fletcher held up her hands in surrender. No need to get your hackles up, Kade. I was not criticizing, just observing. She turned to Genevieve with a warmer expression. Come on then, dear. Let us see what we can find for you. I have some ready-made dresses in the back and underthings, and you will need sturdy boots if you're going to be working on a ranch. An hour later, Genevieve had 2 simple calico dresses, a split riding skirt, several changes of undergarments, a pair of serviceable boots, a warm coat, and various other necessities. Kade paid for everything without complaint, waving away her protests that she would repay him from her wages. You cannot work if you are not properly clothed, he said. Consider it an advance on your salary. They had dinner at the hotel dining room where Genevieve endured the curious stares of the other diners, then climbed back into the wagon for the journey back to the ranch. By the time they arrived, the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold behind the mountains. Kade unloaded Genevieve's packages while she stood looking at the cabin that would be her new home, at least for a while. "You can have the cabin," Kade said again. "I will move my things to the bunkhouse tonight." "That does not seem fair," Genevieve protested. "This is your home." "The bunkhouse is fine," Kade insisted. "It has a stove and a good bed, and I sleep there half the time anyway. You will need your privacy, and so will I. This way we each have our own space. It is better for everyone." Genevieve could see the sense in that. If she was going to be living here, even temporarily, she would need a place that was truly hers, not just a borrowed corner of someone else's space. "All right, thank you." Over the next few weeks, Genevieve settled into a routine that was unlike anything she had ever experienced. She woke at dawn and started the fire in the cabin stove, then made breakfast for herself and Kade. He would appear from the bunkhouse just as the coffee was ready, and they would eat together before he headed out to work with the cattle. Genevieve spent her days cleaning the cabin, doing laundry, mending clothes, and attempting to improve her rudimentary cooking skills. In the evenings, Kade would return tired and dusty, and they would share supper and conversation before he retreated to the bunkhouse for the night. It was hard work, much harder than anything Genevieve had done in Philadelphia. Her hands grew rough from washing clothes and scrubbing floors. Her back ached from bending over the stove and the washtub. But there was something satisfying about the work, something that made her feel useful and capable in a way that keeping her father's books had never done. And then there was Kade. The more time Genevieve spent with him, the more she came to admire him. He was unfailingly polite, never assuming familiarity just because they lived in close proximity. He was also surprisingly interesting, with a dry sense of humor, and a wealth of knowledge about the land and animals and the sometimes harsh realities of frontier life. He told her stories about his years working on other ranches, about cattle drives and blizzards and encounters with wolves and bears. He showed her how to ride Duke, patiently teaching her until she could stay in the saddle at a trot without bouncing like a sack of grain. In return, Genevieve told him about Philadelphia, about the theater and concerts and society balls that now seemed like they belonged to another world, another life. She told him about her parents, about the quiet happiness of their home before the typhoid came. She even told him eventually about the broken engagement, about the humiliation of being cast aside for someone richer and more socially prominent. "He was a fool," Kade said simply when she finished the story. "Any man who cannot see what he has in front of him is not worth your tears." It was the nicest thing anyone had said to her in a long time. The summer deepened into August, and with it came a new awareness between them. Genevieve found herself watching Kade when he worked, admiring the easy grace with which he handled the horses, the strength in his shoulders when he lifted heavy loads. She caught him watching her too, his blue eyes following her as she moved around the cabin, a look on his face that made her heart race. They were careful not to touch unnecessarily, careful to maintain the proper boundaries between employer and employee. But the attraction was there, simmering beneath the surface of every conversation, every shared meal, every accidental meeting of eyes across the cabin. Genevieve told herself it was just proximity, just loneliness, but she knew she was lying. She was falling in love with Kade Thompson, and she suspected he was falling in love with her too. The crisis came in mid-August, on a day so hot that even the shade offered no relief. Genevieve had spent the morning doing laundry, hauling bucket after bucket of water from the well, heating it on the stove, scrubbing shirts and trousers and bedding until her arms trembled with fatigue. She was hanging the last of the clean laundry on the line she had strung between two posts when she heard hoofbeats. She turned to see 3 men riding into the yard. They were strangers, rough-looking men with hard eyes and guns on their hips. Genevieve felt a stab of fear. Kade was somewhere on the north range checking on the cattle. She was alone. The men reined in their horses near the cabin. The leader, a big man with a scarred face and tobacco-stained teeth, looked her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. "Well now," he said, "what do we have here? A pretty little thing all by herself. Where's your man, honey?" "I am the housekeeper here," Genevieve said, trying to keep her voice steady. Mr. Thompson will be back soon. Can I help you with something? The leader grinned, showing those tobacco-stained teeth. Oh, I think you can help us with a lot of things. Me and the boys have been riding hard. We are tired and thirsty and hungry. You think you could rustle us up some grub? Everything in Genevieve's instincts screamed danger. These were not honest cowboys looking for work or neighbors stopping by for a visit. These were bad men, possibly outlaws, and she was alone with them. But she also knew that showing fear would only make things worse. I can make you some coffee and sandwiches, she said. Then you will need to move along. Mr. Thompson does not like strangers on his property. The leader exchanged glances with his companions. That's so? Well, maybe we do not care much what Mr. Thompson likes. Maybe we'll just take what we want and be on our way. One of the other men laughed, a sound that raised the hair on the back of Genevieve's neck. They dismounted, and the leader started walking toward her. Genevieve backed up, her mind racing. She was 10 yards from the cabin. If she could get inside, she could bar the door, maybe grab the rifle that Kade kept over the fireplace. But before she could move, the leader lunged forward and grabbed her wrist. Let go of me, Genevieve said, trying to pull away. His grip was like iron. Now, why would I do that? The leader said, pulling her closer. We got all afternoon, and you are the prettiest thing I have seen in months. Then a voice like thunder rang out across the yard. Get your hands off her, now! Everyone froze. Genevieve turned her head and saw Kade standing near the barn, his rifle raised to his shoulder, aimed directly at the leader's head. His face was set like stone, his eyes colder than she had ever seen them. The leader released Genevieve's wrist, but did not step back. Easy there, friend. We do not want any trouble. We were just talking to your housekeeper. I saw what you were doing, Kade said, his voice still that terrible flat thunder. And if you do not get on your horses and ride out of here in the next 30 seconds, I am going to shoot you, all 3 of you. I am a good shot, and this rifle holds 6 rounds. That is 2 bullets each. The 3 men exchanged glances. They were armed. But Kade had the advantage of surprise and position. The leader's face twisted into an ugly grimace. You are making a mistake, friend. There are 3 of us and 1 of you. Those are not good odds. They are excellent odds for me, Kade said calmly. I take you first, then your friend on the left, then the one on the right. You will all be dead before you clear leather. Now get out. You have 20 seconds. For a moment, Genevieve thought they were going to fight. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Then the leader spat in the dirt and turned to his horse. This is not over, he said, swinging into the saddle. We will remember this. So will I, Kade said. And if I ever see you on my property again, I will not bother with warnings. Now ride! The 3 men rode out, but slowly, taking their time, making it clear they were leaving of their own choice, not because they were afraid. When they were finally out of sight, Kade lowered the rifle and walked quickly to Genevieve. Are you all right? He asked urgently. What, did they hurt you? No, Genevieve said, though her wrist ached where the man had grabbed her. You got here in time. But Kade, those men, they were dangerous. What if they come back? They will not, Kade said grimly. Men like that are cowards at heart. They prey on the weak and defenseless. When they meet someone willing to fight, they move on to easier targets. He looked at her, and some of the hardness left his eyes. I should not have left you alone. I am sorry. You cannot be here every minute, Genevieve said. You have work to do, but maybe you could teach me to shoot? That rifle over the fireplace. I would feel better if I knew how to use it. Kade nodded slowly. That is a good idea. I will teach you, starting tomorrow. That night after supper, they sat on the porch of the cabin watching the stars come out. Kade had moved a chair from the bunkhouse so they could both sit comfortably. Genevieve had discovered that she loved these evening interludes, loved the peaceful darkness, the sounds of the night insects, the scent of sage on the wind. You were very brave today, Kade said after a long silence, standing up to those men. I was terrified, Genevieve admitted, but I did not want to show it. I thought if they saw how afraid I was, it would make everything worse. You were right, Kade said, and you did good. But Genevieve, if something like that happens again, if there is ever any kind of trouble, I want you to promise me you will run. Do not try to be brave. Just run and hide and stay safe, please. There was something in his voice, something raw and vulnerable, that made Genevieve's heart clench. She turned to look at him, and in the starlight she could see the expression on his face, could see the fear and concern and something else, something deeper. Why? She asked softly. Why does it matter so much? Kade was quiet for so long she thought he was not going to answer. Then he said very quietly, because I cannot lose you. I know that is not fair. I know you are only here because you had nowhere else to go. I know come spring you will probably want to continue to California or go back east or do any one of 100 things that do not include staying on a hard-scrabble ranch in the middle of nowhere. But I cannot help how I feel. I care about you, Genevieve, more than I should, more than is probably wise. Genevieve's breath caught in her throat. She had known on some level that they were both dancing around feelings that went far beyond those between employer and employee. But hearing Kade say it out loud, hearing the emotion in his voice, made it real in a way that frightened and thrilled her in equal measure. Kade, she said, I'm not going anywhere, not to California, not back east. I want to stay here with you, if you will have me. He turned to look at her, and even in the darkness she could see the hope dawning in his eyes. You mean that? You would choose this life? It is not an easy life, Genevieve. The winters are brutal. The work is hard. You would be isolated miles from town, with only me for company most of the time. You deserve so much more than that. What I deserve is a chance to be happy, Genevieve said, and I am happy here. I am happier than I have been since before my parents died, maybe happier than I have ever been. I love this place. I love the space and the sky and the mountains. I love the work, even when it is hard. And I love you, Kade Thompson. I think I've been falling in love with you since the moment you rode into that river for me. For a moment, Kade just stared at her, as though he could not quite believe what he was hearing. Then he stood up and crossed the space between them in 2 strides. He pulled Genevieve to her feet and into his arms, and then he was kissing her, his lips warm and firm against hers, his arms strong around her back. Genevieve melted into him, her hands coming up to tangle in his hair, kissing him back with all the pent-up longing of the past months. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kade rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said. I do not have much to offer. Just this ranch and my heart. But they are both yours if you want them. Yes, Genevieve said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, of course, yes, I want nothing more. They were married 3 weeks later in Wheatland, in the small church at the edge of town. Mrs. Fletcher and her husband stood as witnesses, and half the town turned out to see the Philadelphia lady marry the young rancher. Genevieve wore a dress that Mrs. Fletcher helped her sew, simple white cotton with lace at the collar, and she carried a bouquet of the same wildflowers she had tried to pick that fateful morning by the river. Kade wore his best suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his blue eyes shining as he said his vows. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, he kissed her there in front of God and everyone, a kiss that was both tender and full of promise. They drove back to the ranch in Kade's wagon, newly married, laughing at nothing and everything. When they reached the cabin, Kade lifted Genevieve down from the wagon seat and then without warning swept her up in his arms. "What are you doing?" she asked, laughing. "Carrying my bride over the threshold," Kade said, grinning. "It is tradition." He carried her into the cabin, which Genevieve had spent the past week cleaning and decorating until it shone. She had made new curtains for the window, had put wildflowers in a jar on the table, had hung her 2 calico dresses on pegs next to Kade's shirts, making it theirs, not just his. Kade set her down gently and looked around, taking in all the changes. "You have made it beautiful," he said. "You have made everything beautiful." That night, their wedding night, Genevieve finally understood what it meant to belong to someone, to be loved completely and without reservation. Kade was gentle and patient, understanding that she was nervous, taking his time to make sure she felt safe and cherished. And afterward, lying in his arms in the darkness, listening to his steady heartbeat beneath her ear, Genevieve felt a contentment she had never known existed. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Kade murmured, his lips in her hair. "For riding into the river for me, for saving my life, for giving me a home, for loving me." Kade tightened his arms around her. "I would ride into 1,000 rivers for you every single day if that's what it took. You are my everything, Genevieve Thompson." The next months were a blur of work and happiness. Genevieve threw herself into learning everything she could about running a ranch. She learned to milk the cow Kade bought from a neighbor. She learned to make butter and cheese. She learned to preserve vegetables and fruit against the coming winter. She learned to shoot, too, and became proficient enough with the rifle that Kade declared he felt comfortable leaving her alone when necessary. The first snow came in early November, and with it came the harsh reality of a Wyoming winter. The temperatures plummeted. The wind howled down from the mountains, driving snow before it in blinding sheets. Some days they could not see the barn from the cabin, and Kade strung a rope between the two buildings so he would not get lost trying to feed the stock. But inside the cabin, with the fire burning bright and the storm raging outside, Genevieve felt safer and more content than she ever had in the grand houses of Philadelphia. She and Kade would sit by the fire in the evenings, and he would read to her from the few books he owned, or she would sew while he carved pieces of wood into intricate shapes. They talked about everything and nothing. They made plans for the ranch, for the future they would build together. In January, Genevieve discovered she was expecting a child. She told Kade on a bitter, cold morning when the frost was thick on the windows, and the look on his face, the pure joy and wonder and love, made her cry. He held her close and promised that he would take care of her, that he would take care of their baby, that they would have a good life together. The baby came in early September, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and blue eyes. They named him Daniel, after Kade's father. Genevieve had never known love like what she felt when she held her son for the first time, when she saw Kade cradling the baby in his strong, gentle hands. The three of them, their own little family, complete and perfect. The years flowed past like water in a stream, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. 2 years after Daniel came a daughter, whom they named Rose. She had Genevieve's dark eyes and sweet disposition, and she adored her big brother. The cabin grew too small, so Kade built an addition, 2 more rooms and a proper kitchen. The ranch prospered. The herd grew. They hired a hand to help with the work, a young man named Samuel who slept in the bunkhouse and ate meals with the family. Genevieve sometimes thought about her aunt and uncle in California, wondered if they had received word of her supposed death, wondered if they mourned her. She thought about writing to them, explaining what had happened, but the words never seemed adequate. How could she explain that being swept down that river had been the best thing that ever happened to her? That losing everything had allowed her to find what truly mattered? When Daniel was 5 and Rose was 3, a letter arrived from California. Mrs. Porter, the woman from the wagon train, had somehow tracked down the Wheatland post office. She wrote that she had kept Genevieve's trunk safe all the way to San Francisco, had delivered it to her aunt and uncle, along with the sad news that Genevieve had been lost in a river accident. She apologized for not searching harder, for not finding her, for assuming the worst. Genevieve wrote back immediately, a long letter explaining everything, how Kade had saved her, how the wagon train had moved on without her, how she had stayed and married and built a life in Wyoming. She assured Mrs. Porter that no apology was necessary, that everything had worked out for the best. She thanked her for safeguarding her belongings and asked if they might be sent to Wyoming. The trunk arrived 3 months later, sent by her aunt and uncle along with a letter expressing their relief that she was alive and their happiness at her marriage. Inside the trunk were Genevieve's clothes, now hopelessly out of fashion, and her mother's jewelry, the few pieces of value that had survived the typhoid and the journey west. There was also a sum of money, more than Genevieve had expected, apparently left from the sale of her parents' house and effects. It was enough to buy more cattle, to expand the ranch, to secure their future even more firmly. But more precious than the money or the jewelry was a small leather journal, her mother's journal, filled with her flowing handwriting. Genevieve sat up late that night, reading it by lamplight, crying and laughing at her mother's observations about life and love and family. And on the last page, in her mother's elegant script, she found words that seemed to have been written directly to her. "My dearest Genevieve, if you are reading this, then I am gone. But I want you to know that I believe in you. I believe that you will find your way in this world, that you will find love and happiness, that you will build a good life. Do not be afraid to take chances. Do not be afraid to follow your heart, even if it leads you places you never expected to go. The greatest adventures often begin with a single step into the unknown. I love you forever, my darling girl. Be brave, be happy, be loved, Mother." Genevieve closed the journal and pressed it to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Her mother had been right. She had taken a step into the unknown when she tried to cross that creek. She had been swept away by forces beyond her control, and she had ended up exactly where she belonged. 10 years after that day in the river, Genevieve stood on the porch of the expanded cabin watching Kade and Daniel working with the horses in the corral. Rose was inside helping her prepare dinner, chattering about the new calf that had been born that morning. Genevieve was expecting again her fourth child due in the winter. They also had a 3-year-old son named Thomas, who was currently napping in the back bedroom. The ranch had grown into one of the most successful operations in the county. They ran 300 head of cattle now, and Kade employed 4 full-time hands. The cabin had become a proper house with glass windows and wooden floors and enough rooms for their growing family. They had money in the bank, good neighbors, and a place in the community, but more than all of that, they had each other. They had a love that had been forged in crisis and tempered by time into something unbreakable. They had children who were healthy and happy. They had a home that they had built together board by board, dream by dream. Kade looked up from the corral and saw her standing there. He said something to Daniel, then walked across the yard to the porch. He climbed the steps and came to stand beside her, slipping his arm around her thickening waist, pulling her close. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How lucky I am," Genevieve said. "How blessed, how grateful." Kade kissed her temple. "I am the lucky one. I rode into that river expecting to save a stranger. Instead, I found my whole world." Genevieve turned in his arms and kissed him properly, deeply, with all the love and passion of 11 years together. When they broke apart, they stood there on the porch, looking out over their land, their cattle, their life. Rose came to the door and called them for dinner, and they went inside to their family, to the table laden with good food, to the laughter and warmth and love that filled every corner of the house. That night, after the children were asleep, Genevieve and Kade sat by the fire as they had done countless times before. Kade was whittling a toy horse for Thomas, and Genevieve was mending one of Daniel's shirts. The fire crackled softly, and outside the wind whispered through the cottonwoods. "Do you ever regret it?" Kade asked suddenly. "Giving up California, the life you might have had?" Genevieve looked at him in surprise. "Not for one single moment. Do you regret marrying me, taking on a wife and a family when you might have had an easier life alone?" "Never," Kade said fiercely. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and the children, this family. I just want to make sure you are happy, that you do not feel like you settled for less than you deserved." Genevieve set down her mending and moved to sit on the floor beside his chair, leaning her head against his knee. He rested his hand on her hair, stroking gently. "I did not settle," she said quietly. "I found everything I ever wanted, more than I even knew I wanted. I found a home, a purpose, a love that fills me up until I think I might burst from the happiness of it. I found you, Kade, and that was worth every single thing I lost along the way." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Then Genevieve said, "Tell me the story." Kade smiled. He knew exactly which story she meant. "Again? The children have heard it 100 times. I know, but I like hearing you tell it. I like remembering." So Kade told her, in his quiet, measured voice, the story of a cowboy who rode his horse into a raging river to save a woman clinging to a log. He told her about the cold water and the strong current, about Duke's courage and his own fear that they would not make it in time. He told her about pulling her from the river, about the moment he looked into her eyes and knew somewhere deep inside that his life would never be the same. Genevieve listened, though she knew every word by heart. She listened because it was their story, the foundation on which everything else had been built. She listened because it reminded her that the best things in life often come from the worst moments, that tragedy and joy are sometimes separated by the thinnest of margins, that a single act of courage can change everything. When he finished, she looked up at him. "What made you do it? Really? You could have been killed. Duke could have been killed. We were strangers. What made you take that risk?" Kade was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he said, "I do not know if I can explain it. I saw you out there in the water, and I saw how hard you were fighting to hold on, how determined you were to survive, and I thought, if she is willing to fight that hard for her life, then the least I can do is fight alongside her. It was not heroic or noble. It was just what needed to be done, and I had a good horse and a rope and the ability to help, so I did." "It was heroic," Genevieve said firmly. "You are a hero, my hero, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond." Kade pulled her up into his lap, holding her carefully, mindful of the baby growing inside her. "And I will love you just as long, maybe longer. Maybe forever is not long enough for how much I love you, Genevieve Thompson." They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the firelight, listening to the quiet sounds of their sleeping children, grateful beyond words for the life they had built together. A life that had begun with a raging river and a cowboy brave enough to ride into danger for a woman he did not know. A life that had grown into something richer and deeper than either of them could have imagined. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. The wind sang through the grass, the cattle settled down for the night. And inside the house, two people who had found each other against all odds held fast to the love that had saved them both. The years continued to pass, each one adding new chapters to their story. The children grew. Daniel became a skilled rancher like his father, learning to read the weather and the land, learning when to move the cattle and when to let them graze. Rose grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's intelligence and her father's determination. Thomas proved to be a natural with horses, able to gentle even the most skittish colt. And the baby born that winter, another girl they named Emma, brought laughter and light into every corner of their lives. Kade's hair began to show threads of silver at the temples. Genevieve discovered laugh lines around her eyes and found she did not mind them at all. They were the marks of a life well lived, of years spent smiling and laughing and loving. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most respected operations in Wyoming territory. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, dealt with cattle rustlers and wolves, and the 1,000 other challenges that came with frontier life. Through it all, they had each other. When Genevieve was frightened, Kade was her strength. When Kade was weary, Genevieve was his comfort. They moved through life as partners in every sense of the word, sharing the work and the decisions and the joys and sorrows. When Wyoming became a state in 1890, the whole family traveled to Cheyenne for the celebration. It was the children's first trip to a real city, and their wide-eyed wonder at the tall buildings and crowded streets made Genevieve and Kade laugh. But after a week, they were all ready to return to the ranch, to the wide open spaces and clear air and peace of their home. On the way back, they stopped at the place where the Medicine Bow River had nearly claimed Genevieve's life 20 years before. The river was calm now, in late summer, running slow and shallow over smooth stones. It looked innocent, harmless, nothing like the raging monster it became in spring. Kade stopped the wagon and they all climbed down. The children ran ahead, splashing in the shallow water, looking for interesting rocks. Genevieve and Kade stood on the bank, hand in hand, remembering. "Hard to believe it was here," Genevieve said, "that this quiet river almost killed me." "Hard to believe it has been 20 years, Kade replied. "Seems like yesterday sometimes. Seems like a lifetime ago others." "Both," Genevieve said. "It is both." She turned to look at him. This man who had saved her life and given her everything. His face was weathered now, lined by years of sun and wind, but his blue eyes were as clear and bright as ever, and when he looked at her, she saw the same love she had seen that first night on the porch when he told her he could not lose her. "Do you know what I think about sometimes?" she asked. "I think about all the tiny decisions that had to happen exactly right for us to find each other. If the wagon train had camped somewhere else, if I had not tried to cross that creek, if you had been working somewhere else that day, if you had not seen me, if you had decided it was too dangerous to try a rescue, any one of those things goes differently and we never meet. We never have this life. It feels like the hand of God, like we were meant to find each other." "I think we were," Kade said. "I do not know much about fate or destiny or any of that. But I know that pulling you from that river was the best thing I ever did, and I know that loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life." They stood there watching their children play in the river that had brought them together, watching the water flow past on its eternal journey to the sea, and they were grateful. Grateful for life, for love, for the incredible gift of finding each other in a vast and often lonely world. That night, camped under the stars, the whole family gathered around the campfire. Daniel, now 20, played his harmonica, a skill he had learned from one of the ranch hands. Rose sang, her voice sweet and pure. Thomas and Emma roasted marshmallows, a treat Genevieve had learned to make from a recipe in a ladies' magazine. And Kade and Genevieve sat together, his arm around her shoulders, watching their children, their beautiful, perfect children, and feeling a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "Tell us the story," Emma begged, as she always did when they made camp. "Tell us how you and Mama met." So Kade told it again, with the children hanging on every word even though they had heard it 100 times before. He told about the raging river and the desperate woman and the brave horse. He told about pulling Genevieve from the water, about taking her home, about falling in love with her more and more each day until he could not imagine life without her. And when he finished, the children sighed with satisfaction, as they always did, and declared it the most romantic story in the world. Later, after the children were asleep in their bedrolls, Kade and Genevieve lay together under the blankets, looking up at the immense star-filled sky. The night was cool and quiet, with just the occasional sound of horses moving or a coyote calling in the distance. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had made it to California?" Kade asked quietly. "If the wagon train had waited for you?" "Sometimes," Genevieve admitted, "but I can never imagine it clearly. That life feels like it belonged to someone else, not me. This is my real life, the one that matters. You and the children and the ranch. This is who I was always meant to be." "Good," Kade said, pulling her closer, "because I cannot imagine life without you. You are my partner, my best friend, my love. Everything good in my life started the day I rode into that river for you." "And everything good in mine started the day you pulled me out," Genevieve said. She turned in his arms and kissed him, a long, slow kiss that held 20 years of love and devotion. When they broke apart, she nestled her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes, listening to his heartbeat, feeling safe and loved and home. They returned to the ranch the next day, and life went on as it always did. The seasons turned. Winter came with its snow and cold, spring with its floods and newborn calves, summer with its heat and hard work, fall with its beauty and preparation for the next winter. The children grew and eventually began lives of their own. Daniel married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring county and brought her home to the ranch, where Kade built them a house on the far side of the property. Rose met a young lawyer from Cheyenne and married him. though she visited the ranch often with her growing family. Thomas partnered with his father in running the ranch, and Emma became a teacher in Wheatland beloved by her students. Through it all, Kade and Genevieve remained the center, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They grew old together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. When Kade's leg, the one that had been injured in some long-ago accident, began to pain him more in cold weather, Genevieve would rub liniment into it each night, her hands gentle and caring. When Genevieve's eyes grew weak, Kade read to her in the evenings, just as he had done when they were young. They celebrated their 30th anniversary quietly, with just their immediate family gathered at the ranch. There was a big dinner, with roast beef and potatoes and all the favorite foods of their children and grandchildren. There were toasts and laughter and stories, many of them about the early days when the ranch was new and money was tight and life was hard but somehow perfect anyway. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Daniel pulled his parents aside. "I have been thinking," he said, "about the river, about how you two met, and I think we should put up a marker there, something to commemorate what happened, because that is where our family began, in a way. That is where everything started." Kade and Genevieve looked at each other, surprised and touched by the suggestion. "That would be nice," Genevieve said. "A way to remember." So the following spring, when the river was once again running high with snowmelt, the whole extended family gathered at the spot where Genevieve had nearly drowned 31 years before. Daniel and Thomas had carved a beautiful wooden marker and set it in stone on the riverbank. It read simply, "Here, in May 1882, Kade Thompson rode his horse into the raging water to save Genevieve Monroe. From that act of courage grew a love that has blessed us all. May we never forget that the best things in life are worth fighting for." There was not a dry eye among the assembled family as they unveiled the marker. Genevieve stood with Kade's arm around her, looking at the river that had almost killed her, that had instead given her everything. Her children stood nearby with their spouses and children. 3 generations, all descended from a single moment of bravery and a love that refused to die. As they turned to leave, to head back to the ranch for the celebration meal Genevieve and Rose had spent days preparing, a young couple approached. They were travelers, clearly, dusty from the road, with a wagon and tired horses. The man approached Kade respectfully. "Excuse me, sir," he said. "We saw all the people and wondered what was happening. Is there some kind of festival?" "Just a family gathering," Kade said. "We are commemorating something that happened here a long time ago." The young man glanced at the marker, read it, and smiled. "That is beautiful. A real love story." He looked at his wife, who was pregnant, and looked tired. "We are heading west ourselves, hoping to make a new start in California." Genevieve felt a shock of recognition, seeing herself and her younger hopes reflected in this couple. "Be careful of the rivers," she said gently, "especially in spring. They can be more dangerous than they look." "We will," the young woman promised. "Thank you for the warning." As the couple moved on, Genevieve watched them go, remembering the girl she had been, full of dreams and fears and uncertainties about the future. That girl could never have imagined the life she would eventually live, the love she would find, the family she would create. "What are you thinking?" Kade asked, as he had asked so many times over the years. "That I would do it all again," Genevieve said. "Every moment, every hardship, every triumph. I would let that river sweep me away 1,000 times if it meant finding you at the end." Kade kissed her forehead, and they stood there for a moment, an old couple now, their hair gray, their bodies marked by years of hard work and hard living, but their love as strong and true as it had been on that first desperate day by the river. Then they turned and walked hand in hand back to their family, back to the ranch, back to the life they had built together from courage and hope and a love that had conquered everything thrown at it. The sun was setting as they reached home, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and pink. The mountains loomed dark against the brilliant sunset. Cattle lowed in the distance. The smell of cooking food drifted from the house. Children's laughter rang out across the yard, and Kade and Genevieve stood together on the porch of the house that had once been a simple cabin, looking out over everything they had created, everything they had become, and they were filled with a joy so profound it felt almost like prayer. This was their legacy, not just the land or the cattle or the buildings, but the love that had started it all, the love that had sustained them through every challenge, the love that would live on through their children and grandchildren long after they were gone. That night, after everyone had eaten their fill, and the guests had departed, and the grandchildren had been tucked into beds throughout the house, Kade and Genevieve sat together in their bedroom, the same bedroom where they had spent their wedding night 30 years before. The window was open to the cool spring air, and they could hear the familiar sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. "I have been thinking," Genevieve said, brushing out her long gray hair, "about that young couple we met today, about how their whole lives are ahead of them, full of possibilities and challenges and joy and sorrow, and they do not know any of it yet." "Much like us once upon a time," Kade observed. He was already in bed, propped up on pillows, watching her with the same appreciation he had shown for 30 years. "Exactly like us," Genevieve agreed. She finished with her hair and came to bed, settling beside him as naturally as breathing. "And I realized that if I could go back and tell that young girl on the wagon train what was going to happen to her, she would never believe it. She would never believe that getting swept down a river would be the beginning of the greatest adventure of her life." "Do you think you would warn her," Kade asked, "if you could go back, knowing everything that was going to happen?" Genevieve thought about it seriously. "No," she said finally, "I do not think I would. Because if she knew, she might try to change things. She might be more careful at that creek crossing, and then none of this happens. No you, no us, no children, no ranch, no life together. I would rather let it all unfold exactly as it did, every joy and every sorrow, every triumph and every challenge, because it led us here, to this moment, to this life." Kade pulled her close, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, the same heart that had been brave enough to ride into a raging river for a stranger, the same heart that had loved her faithfully for 3 decades. "I love you," he said simply. "I loved you from the moment I pulled you from that river, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. You are my everything, Genevieve Thompson, my whole world." "And you are mine," Genevieve said. "You rode into the water for me, and you saved my life. But you did more than that. You gave me a reason to live, a purpose, a home, a love that has sustained me through everything. You gave me this beautiful life, and I am grateful for every single moment of it." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms. Two souls who had found each other against impossible odds and built something lasting and true. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human joy and sorrow. But inside that house on a ranch in Wyoming, there was only love, deep and abiding and eternal. The kind of love that begins with an act of courage and grows through years of partnership and devotion into something stronger than steel, more precious than gold. The kind of love that writes itself into family legends and lives on through generations. The kind of love that makes all the struggle and hardship and uncertainty of life not just bearable, but worthwhile. The kind of love that starts when a cowboy rides his horse into raging water to save a woman clinging desperately to a log, and ends only when the last person who remembers their story has passed from this world into the next. And perhaps not even then. Perhaps love like that lives on forever, written in the stars, whispered in the wind, present in every act of courage and every leap of faith taken by people brave enough to risk everything for a chance at something real. That was the legacy of Kade and Genevieve Thompson. Not wealth or land or status, but love. Pure, simple, eternal love. And it was more than enough. It was everything.